Fox News Alert, I'm Brett Baer in Washington. This is a major night for two investigations affecting the Trump administration. The special counsel and the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York have just released information about the prosecution of former Trump attorney Michael Cohen and the sentencing recommendations they give. And we await similar data about former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. This after former FBI Director James Comey testified in a closed-door congressional hearing this afternoon about alleged anti-Trump bias in the Justice Department. We start off this evening with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on Capitol Hill, digesting all of this. Good evening, Catherine.
That's right, Brett, and good evening. Within the last hour, we've had those two key filings in the Cohen case, one from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the other for the special counsel. The recommendation for Cohen is significant jail time, about 4 years, and a fine of $500,000. One of the filings from the special counsel does give us an indication of the kind of information Cohen offered on Russia. And that section of the filing reads in part, Cohen provided the SCO, the special counsel office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters, according to its investigation, that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017 and 2018 time period. Meantime, here on Capitol Hill, a short time ago, the former FBI Director James Comey wrapped up 6 hours of testimony, and at that point, he was ready to speak to reporters.
When you read the transcript, you will see that we're talking again about Hillary Clinton's emails, for heaven's sake, so I'm not sure we need to do this at all. But I'm trying to respect the institution and to answer questions in a respectful way. You'll see I did that in the transcript.
Republicans said the private interview under oath is designed to drill down on the FBI's actions during the 2016 election, when both campaigns were under federal investigation, including contacts between former top Justice Department official Bruce Orr and the man behind the infamous Trump dossier.
We learned from Bruce Orr that Christopher Steele had told him he was desperate to stop President Trump from being president. I want to know when James Comey knew that.
Democrats say the goal is to damage the special counsel and promise to shut down the House GOP investigation when they take over the majority in coming weeks.
It's a waste of time to start with. And the entire purpose of this investigation is to cast aspersions in the real investigation as well.
Just 2 hours into the session, a senior committee Republican cried foul, claiming a government lawyer shut down key questions.
Director Comey is in there with two attorneys. I would say at his gleeful acceptance, instructed that he will not be answering a great many questions that are clearly items at the core of our investigations.
But House Democrats say little of note was learned from today's private session.
It's just been a wild goose chase. It's been a rerun of the same questions and answers through multiple interviews. I like TV reruns, but this is getting a little ridiculous.
Okay, on Comey, what reporters were told is that we do expect him back up here for another session of this transcribed under oath interview in about 2 weeks' time. And literally, since we've been on the air, there's been breaking news in the Manafort filing. We've just have an order filed by the judge in that case in Washington. Part of that filing that goes to the special counsel allegations that he violated his deal will be kept under seal, but it does appear that part of the filing will be public. We're trying to get onto the website. As you can anticipate, it's jammed with traffic, but as soon as we have new information, Brett, we'll bring that to you.
Okay, Catherine Herridge live on the Hill. Catherine, thanks. Just moments ago, we saw a tweet about 3 minutes ago from the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, at Real Donald J. Trump, totally clears the president. Thank you! Exclamation point. Assume he's talking about all of this. Don't have any more detail on that, but that was the tweet that just came out. Let's dig into this filing, these filings, what we know, what we don't know. Let's get some analysis right now from George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, I want to start with the Russia part of the special counsel filing and the breakdown, as Catherine mentioned, of these 4 ways Cohen helps. And we've got it in a bullet point here. And It's new information that we didn't know, but what's your reading of that particular part?
Some of this we've known about, obviously. There was this Moscow project, which itself is not a crime. President Trump's been open about the fact that he was continuing as a businessman, as a backup plan if he didn't make the successful run for the White House. But there are some aspects of this that should be pretty worrisome for the White House. One of the things I thought was interesting that stood out, if you take these four areas where Cohen is found to have cooperated, two of them you could put under sort of collusion allegation categories, and two you could put under obstruction types of allegations. So they're about even there. But at one point they talk about how Cohen had a contact in Russia who said he had high-ranking connections, and that he promised, quote, campaign political synergy between the two governments. What's interesting about those about the campaign and political synergy there, what is meant by those three words, I don't know. But as a criminal defense attorney, they really stood out to me, because that's the first link, as tenuous as it may be, that we've seen.
Now, the special counsel says that Cohen did cooperate. He started out not cooperating, but eventually he does in the special counsel filing. The U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York says, you know what, we want substantial jail time because we don't think he came to the table with everything. In their filing on page 11, they get into this campaign finance question. That Cohen played a central role in two similar schemes to purchase the rights to stories, each from women who claim to have had an affair with individual one. This is Donald Trump. So as to suppress the stories and thereby prevent them from influencing the election. With respect to both payments, Cohen acted with the intent to influence the 2016 presidential election. Cohen coordinated his actions with one or more members of the campaign, including through meetings and phone calls about the fact, nature, and timing of the payments. In particular, and as Cohen himself has now admitted, with respect to both payments, he acted in coordination with and at the direction of individual one. As a result of Cohen's actions, neither woman spoke to the press prior to the election. Individual one, again, is Donald Trump.
Right.
The implications of that.
Well, it seems to me that this is directly implicating the president in a campaign finance violation. You can't possibly read this and conclude that this idea sort of sprang out of the head of Zeus for Michael Cohen. He was doing this certainly to benefit Donald Trump, but they suggest that he did this in coordination with Donald Trump.
And direction of.
And direction of. And they go on to say that this was an effort to influence the election from the shadows. So they're saying that these two individuals, including the President of the United States, tried to influence the election through the shadows. So what we know at a minimum is this is going to be part of that report going to Congress, and it's going to hit hard. I mean, it's clear that they're saying, they actually say Michael Cohen is credible now. You know, they list all of his lies, his history of deception and greed, but they say now we think he's telling the truth about this stuff. So this is going to be what we see in that part of the report that gets issued from the special counsel, and they are directly implicating the President of the United States. Now, federal election campaign violations are rarely criminal matters, but they can be a crime. The issue is not how serious is this crime to prosecute. The issue is the special counsel has come as close as you could get to accusing the president of a conspiracy to commit a crime. If the special counsel...
You're saying like an unindicted co-conspirator?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything but the name. You know, it's pretty hard to avoid that Donald Trump is all over this in the language he picked by the prosecutors. Now, the problem is not that the crime itself is a huge one. The problem is that if the president engaged in any actions to conceal that crime,
and there's evidence of it,
right, then it becomes much more serious, because then you can have obstruction issues that are real ones. It's obstructing a crime. So the secondary crime could actually be more serious.
What the special counsel was told to do was to get to the bottom of Russia's interference in the 2016 election. In that Russia section, we see the beginnings, but we don't see all the puzzle pieces here.
Yeah, I think there's good news here as well, in the sense that, you know, the thing that caught my eye was that synergy conversation with some unknown Russian. But it also says that nothing came out of that. Cohen didn't even follow up on it because he was already working on the Moscow project. Now, it seems to me that you could argue that Cohen at least viewed this as all about the Moscow project. He had a line going on there, didn't even pick up the phone, essentially, to call back this guy. If there was real collusion in a criminal sense, some type of conspiracy, this sure doesn't look like it. You know, phone calls that aren't followed up, suggestions that these two individuals meet.
The other thing is laying the groundwork, it seems, for some kind of obstruction case. And that is, fourth, Cohen describes the circumstances of preparing and circulating his response to the congressional inquiries. In other words, getting that out to inside the White House.
Yeah, I think the thing to watch here, at least from my perspective, is that obstruction has largely been focused on the firing of Comey, which I've never believed was a serious obstruction case, because I just don't believe you could make out all the elements of obstruction there. But here you see emerging a separate basis for obstruction that the special counsel may be working on. This idea of federal election law violations, the payment to these women, and whether the president obstructed efforts or attempted to mislead on those points. So we may be seeing a sort of metastasized obstruction case here, which is spreading to other areas.
Right. And last thing here, this is really a case that eventually lands on the lap of the incoming House Democratic leadership. Do you believe that the special prosecutor, the special counsel, could subpoena the president? Do you think that there's a lot of legal questions there?
Well, judging from what's in these papers, if I was representing a client, I would expect a subpoena. But it changes because you have the President of the United States. Can he subpoena the president? I think he can. Could he win in that fight? Probably, but you need the runway to do it. If he's going to do it, he needs to get a report out, or he needs to get a subpoena out now, because he's going to be in the courts for a while.
Okay, stand by. Some breaking news. We just have received a heavily redacted filing on the Paul Manafort side of this investigation. Catherine Herridge back with us from Capitol Hill with that. Catherine?
Okay, so Brett, I'm still going through the document as we speak, but I want to draw your attention to sort of the back end of the document. It's heavily redacted. It's heavily redacted, and at around page 8, it gets to the substance of the allegation that he lied to members of the special counsel team, which was a violation of the plea agreement. It cites an episode in May of this year, a text message basically authorizing a third party to be in touch with the administration. And then it also cites an episode in February of this year that one of Manafort's work colleagues said that Manafort had claimed that he had been in touch with the administration. I don't know who that work colleague is, but I think you want to ask yourself whether it could have been Rick Gates. The only reason I mention that because, of course, Rick Gates is another individual who has admitted to lying in the course of this investigation, but he is now cooperating with the special counsel. I'm still going through the record, but those seem to be two of the foundational lies they say Manafort made, because after the plea agreement, the understanding was that he would no longer have that contact. But again, and I'm still looking through the record, that is a process crime. It's lying about his actions, but it's not going to the issue of contact with the Russians. I'm still reading through the records. Let me come back to you when I have more, but those are two things that jump out at me right there about violating the agreement.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. As we look at these documents
You're
just
welcome.
Coming to us, you can see the redacted portions, and they're significant on some of these pages, much like you saw in the Michael Flynn filing. Back with Jonathan Turley, as we're sifting through this, it seems like some of the redacted parts are lying about the fact and frequency of connections with, we don't know, redacted, falsely told investigators about, and it's electronic communications and travel records. So obviously the special counsel is making a case here that they can't trust Manafort, and they're going to go back and he told multiple discernible lies, it says. These were not instances of mere memory lapses. If the defendant contends the government has not acted in good faith, the government is available to prove the false statements at a hearing, saying they have the evidence to back it up.
Right. Well, first of all, we know that Paul Manafort is not very discerning. You know, he was nailed even before trial on the phone, essentially trying to influence witnesses. And that was a particularly moronic act, since you have to know that your phone is being monitored at that stage when you're under home confinement. And it does sound like this it fulfills that pattern. They're suggesting that they have tapes and other proof that he directly lied. What I think is interesting about both these filings, though, is you have two individuals here, even Michael Cohen, who's clearly not giving the special counsel what he wants. And we've seen that with Corsi, we've seen that with Papadopoulos, that here you've got someone like Cohen over here who's cooperating across the board, but not enough. And the question is why? What is it that they want Cohen to say? And that, I think, fulfills the narrative of the White House, that Cohen is not exactly a discerning individual himself.
Well, in fact, the president has said he's a bold liar. He's tweeted that this guy lies all the time.
Yeah,
et cetera,
and Cohen's about as discerning as a jukebox. Anyone that puts a quarter in, he'll play the tune. And so here you've got this guy who has a bad reputation for saying anything that will help him, but not saying enough to please the special counsel. Now, what is really clear here, well, the Cohen aspect, and this is too late for Paul Manafort, who's going to be ground into a fine pumice, but it's clear with Cohen that this is not the end. For Cohen, they're dangling out what's called a 5K 1.1 letter, which is basically a cooperation letter. And they come back repeatedly and say, you don't have that letter. And so what they're doing is essentially turning this into a canned hunt. They're going to hit him with a sentence. The only way he's out of that cage is if he tells them what they want to hear. But that actually is concerning to me, because here's a guy who's obviously cooperating fully. They say he's credible. So what else did they want him to say?
Right.
And when you look at where the narrative breaks down, you begin to get an idea, where Cohen says, look, nothing happened out of this contact with the Russians.
Yeah.
Nothing went forward. And one suspects that wasn't good enough.
The question is where we go from here and whether this tells us anything about the roadmap ahead, whether these documents suggest that this is coming to a head and could lead to a Mueller report in coming days, or whether this tells us there's a lot more yet to go for Mueller and the Southern District of New York.
Well, the good money was always on a report being issued by the end of the year for one reason only. Mueller doesn't want to wait to issue a report to the Democratic House. That makes it look particularly bad. It would be better to issue at least the collusion part of the report by the end of the year. It's not clear if that's going to happen. But what is clear out of here, and we've known this for a couple weeks now, is that they are trying to bag Donald Trump. I mean, I know that may sound like, oh, how naive that is, but most of us assume that the trail, if any trail that was there, it was long, cold, and barely discernible. In the last few weeks, we've seen Mueller pressuring witness after witness specifically to create a clear shot to Trump. And so what's appearing, the delay here, is they're seeing if they can get that final puzzle piece. The question is what that is. We know Mueller hasn't gotten what he wanted. The question is, has he gotten enough?
In this filing on Manafort, there are multiple references to this guy, Konstantin Kilimnik. Mm-hmm. He was referred to repeatedly in Manafort's trial in Virginia. Prosecutors said Kilimnik was basically based in Cyprus, also known as Dr. K, and helped Manafort complete what they said was his illegal financial transactions from many of shell companies in Cyprus. And they say that he lied about the fact and the frequency of his interactions with this guy. What we don't see is how this Kilimnik fits into a broader piece in a bigger puzzle.
No, this is a wonderfully colorful figure, including the common reference of Dr. K. It's something of 007, in Cyprus, right? But every time we get to Dr. K, everything's blacked out, which indicates that there's ongoing investigations and possibly information they don't want Cohen to see, because Cohen is in the dark here. When you go for a proffer, when you go for immunity, you're given what's called a queen for a day. It seems like, according to these filings, he got a queen for 7 days, where he sat down at least 7 times to proffer what he knows. That's exposing you, by the way. People misunderstand that. Those statements can be used against you to some degree. Clearly in those meetings, he gave them a lot, which they're sort of begrudgingly acknowledging here. Not enough from the perspective of the New York prosecutors. And that's sort of interesting in itself, by the way, because the New York prosecutors are really the boots on the ground in terms of his crimes. They look very closely at Cohen, and they clearly don't like him, and they want him in jail for a significant period of time.
These prosecutors, both the special counsel's office and the Southern District of New York, are really putting the screws to these guys. And what I can't determine is whether they're getting what they're looking for? And is it painting this picture?
Well, they're clearly not, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and so in the big picture, doesn't that seem like, if you're on the Trump team, you look at this and say, I mean, there's some here that we're concerned about, obviously.
Yeah, they should be concerned.
But is the big shoe dropping in these documents?
No, I think that actually there are positive aspects to this. Each of the tantalizing aspects about Russian contacts seem to die on the vine and go nowhere. So this is a sort of a speaking filing, and it doesn't say much about anything other than preliminary conversations and some frustration, obviously, that Cohen is not giving them more. So the question, I think, on a lot of people's minds is going to be, with this level of cooperation, what was the missing detail here for Cohen? Because he seems to have dropped a dime on everyone, but he didn't do enough. Now, as for Manafort, he's gone. Now, the question is an intriguing one, whether Mueller played Manafort or whether Manafort played Mueller. I mean, because Mueller got a lot of information, but Manafort stopped that second trial from occurring, pled to 10 counts. He would have been convicted of more than that, cooperated so he can argue that to the judge, and still is making a play for a pardon.
Yeah, and that's a real question. And the president has said that it's still on the table about a pardon for Manafort. Speaking of which, the president, as we mentioned earlier, putting out that tweet saying it's totally cleared the president. Thank you, exclamation point, for reaction. And I guess that's all we're getting so far. John Roberts joins us from the North Lawn. John?
There has not been much reaction from the president other than that tweet that you mentioned. Let's put it up on the screen so that everybody can read along. The president tweeted it 20 minutes ago. Just says simply, totally clears the president. Thank you. We assume that he was talking about the Michael Cohen sentencing memoranda from the Southern District of New York, as well as the special counsel's office, because at that point, that would have been all he had an opportunity to read, because the Manafort documents didn't come in until after, right about the same time that the president sent out that tweet. And I doubt if he had an opportunity to read them, but perhaps he did. But couple of the things that we can glean from the Manafort memos that I found particularly interesting is that he met 12 times with prosecutors and investigators from the FBI. 2 of those times were before the plea agreement, or 3 of those times, rather, were before the plea agreement. He also met on 2 occasions with the grand jury. I think what's important to note here is that we've got the 7 pages of the sentencing memorandum from the Office of the Special Counsel. What we don't have, and there are a lot of redactions in that, but part of this is under seal for the reason that they did not want information out there about, quote, pending investigations and uncharged individuals. So that might give you some idea, if you read the legal tea leaves in there, the investigatory tea leaves, that there are other investigations underway that could involve other individuals who may face charges. Might be a leap to say that the people will definitely face charges, but uncharged individuals might give you that assumption. Again, what Catherine Herridge said was interesting, that Manafort had contacts with somebody in the administration, and we don't know if that was in the White House or if it was in one of the other departments, all the way up until February of 2018, and then authorized another individual to have contacts with somebody in the administration as recently as May of 2018. And then back to the Office of Special Counsel memo about Michael Cohen. And I know that you found this word interesting because I heard you mention it on the 5, Brett, this idea that whoever Michael Cohen was talking to in the Russian Federation was talking about the potential for, quote, political synergy. And what exactly does that mean? The president and his attorneys all along, all throughout this, have denied that there was any collusion. So far, there doesn't appear to have been any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian individuals to influence the American election. But this idea of political synergy is a curious one, and I would love to know what they're talking about in that. Brett?
There's a lot of things we'd like to know what they're talking about. John, really quickly, there's new legal staff at the White House, a new White House counsel. There's questions whether they're staffed up to be able to handle what may be coming down the track here, not only with the special counsel and the Southern District of New York, but also from the House Democrats.
Yeah, right now they're kind of down a body during the bulk of the Mueller investigation. You had Don McGahn as the White House counsel, and then you had Ty Cobb, who was an in-house counsel who was assigned specifically to the Mueller investigation, but he was really involved with production of a lot of documents. So there was a lot of heavy lifting in the early stages of the Mueller investigation. Ty Cobb left and was replaced by Emmett Flood, who is now taken over as the interim White House counsel. But he doesn't have the same degree of heavy lifting with document production that Ty Cobb did. And Pat Cipollone will be coming in very soon as the White House counsel. And Emmett Flood will either depart or he'll go back to the job that he had after Ty Cobb left, which is looking after the Mueller investigation. But you're right. There's potentially a lot coming down the tracks here. And then when you consider all of the investigations that are going to be launched up on Capitol Hill when the Democrats take over the House, the counsel's office here at the White House is going to be a very, very busy place to be, Brett.
All right, John, we'll head back as news warrants. Let's go back to Catherine Herridge, who's been digesting the Manafort filing. She's up on Capitol Hill. Catherine.
Right. Just an observation about the timeline, and perhaps Professor Turley could weigh in as well. When we got the notice from the judge that there was an order, the judge said that there were two documents. One would be completely under seal, so not public, and the second would be public, but with these heavy redactions. If you actually look at the dates in the public document with redactions, what you see is everything is in this post-election period, post-administration period, post-guilty plea from Manafort. So largely 2018 allegations of witness tampering, as well as contact with the administration, sometimes directly or through a third party, which they say violated the agreement. I think it's worth considering whether the document that is under seal actually relates to what I would call the core time frame on these allegations of collusion, which is the campaign period and then this transition period. I know through my own reporting that the special counsel had been pressing Paul Manafort very hard on the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016. You recall the Russians tried to get the meeting, offering sort of dirt on Hillary Clinton, but the real objective was to try and get these sanctions repealed, the Magnitsky Act. And even if you recall, Jared Kushner, I believe, testified that he had his assistant send an email to him so he'd have an excuse to get out of the meeting. He felt it was such a wash. And my contacts also report that Manafort has been heavily pressured on the WikiLeaks issue. Their argument is that their client has not lied and that the special counsel is seeking information either that he does not have or they do not believe exists. So the public hearing shortly, I think later this month or in January, will allow both sides to make the argument as to whether Manafort has broken the agreement or whether the special counsel, as other witnesses have alleged, have been using strong-arm tactics to obtain information that they don't have or they say is false information they simply will not provide, Brett.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. Looking at these documents, Jonathan Turley, there's this one section on page 9 when it comes to Manafort that they suggest that he has lied about his contacts with the administration. Catherine referenced it there, but it says the evidence demonstrates that Manafort had contacts with the administration, a text exchange in May, authorizes a person to speak with an administration official on his behalf. Separately, according to another Manafort colleague, Manafort said in February 2018 that Manafort had been in communication with a senior administration official. February 2018, up through February 2018. A review of documents recovered from a search of Manafort's electronic documents demonstrates additional contacts with administration officials. So they say they have the juice to
yeah,
say
and
he made the contact.
Much of the Manafort material should not really present a threat to the White House. Look, Manafort was like a perpetual motion machine of criminal conduct. I mean, he was committing crimes all over the globe. And a lot of this goes to those transactions, those dealings totally unrelated to the Trump campaign or the White House. It's that section that you just referenced, which is a serious problem. We already know that there is this defense agreement that existed and was continued to be used between Manafort and the White House after his plea. That's exceptionally rare. I mean,
of course, he had one too, or has one.
That's right. But Manafort was a cooperating witness meeting with prosecutors, and according to reports, his counsel was relaying what the prosecutors were asking him about. Now, this goes one step step further, and this is suggesting direct contacts approved by Manafort to speak with members of the administration. This is where it gets sporty if you dig deeper. That is, Mueller could be trying to develop a serious obstruction case here. Manafort was a cooperating witness with the special counsel. If there was any agreements going back and forth about his curtailing information, withholding information, that would be on all fours an obstruction case. That would be, no one would doubt that as a definition. Now, here's the problem. There's a crime fraud exception to privilege arguments. If Mueller argues that what they were doing was using that defense agreement or other types of communications to undermine his investigation, a judge could strip them of privilege, and you could have a bunch of attorneys being put on the stand.
Which is fascinating, because there's not only Manafort and possibly mining information and giving it back to administration officials, but in the beginning of the filing on Cohen, it says that he voluntarily comes into the special counsel, and they determined, based on the evidence that they had, that he was lying. And then eventually he turns, realizes how much hot water he's in, and starts telling the truth.
Well, actually, the one part that I could imagine Michael Flynn must be grinding his teeth in reading was a footnote where he says, they say, well, basically Cohen came in and just lied all over the place. And then he came back to federal investigators. And then he just corrected it. And you could see Michael Flynn reading this going, okay, well,
what happened to me?
What happened to me? And they just basically brushed it off, said, well, he came back and he basically said sorry and corrected it. So there's a real disconnect in terms of how Mueller is treating false statements.
The other footnote mentions Cohen talking to individual one, which we've established is Donald Trump, numerous times about setting up a meeting with the president of Russia. Now, this is all before, we're in the heat of the campaign and he's saying we don't have any contact. Should that matter in all of this, in the pretext of what becomes this controversy with Russia?
Yeah, as worried as I am about aspects of this, I still think that the White House narrative is holding, in that if you take all of these meetings, including the Trump Tower meeting, all these contacts with the Russians, they go nowhere. I mean, they say, well, will you meet us? We'll give you dirt on Hillary Clinton. And it just basically fizzles out in 15 minutes. Michael Cohen gets a call saying, we've got synergy that we're offering politically, and he doesn't even follow up on it. And so at each of these critical, very suspicious moments, they don't really amount to anything. And
so of the mountain of paper we've just digested for the past 32 minutes, what's the most troubling thing in these documents to you, if you're the Trump administration?
For Manafort, I would be definitely looking at that last part of the filing where they talk about direct contacts approved or even made by Manafort to the White House. That could be a serious obstruction claim. For Cohen, I would be most concerned about the fact that they keep on saying you don't have a 5K 1.1 letter. In other words, you're going nowhere for 5 years, maybe 4, unless you get that letter. And so this is not
Explain that.
Well, because what happened is that they said Cohen declined to be a cooperating witness. Cohen wouldn't decline to be a cooperating witness. He obviously wasn't giving them what they said was a condition of being a cooperating witness. So they're going to hit him with a major sentence. At that point, he can still come back and say, you know what, I've reconsidered. I need a cooperating agreement. And the prosecutors can come and ask for a reduction of sentence. And I think a lot of what this filing says is that letter is in our computer. We just have to type a name on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. Stick around if you would. Be a part of the panel. This is real-time digesting court documents live on air. Thank you. Also today, the first person sent to prison in the Russia investigation has been released. Former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos was sentenced to 14 days after pleading guilty, lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russian intermediaries. Mueller's team recommended incarceration for Papadopoulos because they said he begrudged his cooperation and his lies harmed their probe. Back at the White House, the president cluing now. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. David Campney, senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report. And we welcome back George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Okay, Byron, Molly, David, you've had time to read through. Byron, you first.
Well, I think with the case of Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, you've always had to divide the actual personal crimes they committed in their own businesses versus the things that were related to Donald Trump. So taxi medallions, tax evasion, all of that stuff that Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to, and that's the stuff that's going to get him the real jail time, remember. You can kind of separate that. And likewise with Manafort, some of the Ukraine dealings, all of his shady businesses, buying a million suits and all of that stuff, you can separate that. So the question is, what new does this tell us about Trump? And as far as Michael Cohen is concerned, it doesn't tell us a lot more new, I think. The campaign contributions, the issue of paying off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, and prosecutors characterizing that payoff
as at the direction of.
Yes, as the direction of the president, or at that time the candidate, characterizing that as an illegal contribution. That could be troublesome for the president. I don't think there's a lot new on that. And also we heard that maybe Cohen had some contacts that we did not know about. As far as Manafort is concerned, you have more contacts with the administration. But most of what they're angry at Manafort about is he's still lying about his business in Ukraine. So I'm not sure that really changes the dynamic of the Trump-Russia scandal.
Molly?
I think the reason why this is important, too, is that we were sold the special counsel as an investigation into treasonous collusion with Russia to steal the election. And when you go through these, and I've done a cursory review, I would like to go through it again, we're not seeing treasonous collusion with Russia, nor anything close to it. And that's important because this is a wide-ranging special counsel that has found all sorts of things, gotten people to make plea agreements, or, now we're at the sentencing stage for people. And this is something that even the people who set up this special counsel are now admitting that it was set up not because they thought there was treasonous collusion with Russia to steal an election. We actually know from their own texts that at the time they set up the special counsel that they knew that there was not evidence of that, but in their words, to rein in the president and to constrain him. This is a very high price to pay for Donald Trump winning the election, and it's very important that people care about rule of law. Not that you can't find things that people have done that are crimes, but that there is an important issue here about the federal government, how it runs, and whether it's okay to win an election, even if it makes certain people very angry.
There is, as we referenced earlier, that part about Russia, David, in the special counsel filing, where he talks about how Cohen cooperated on the Russia-related matters. It seems to me sort of like coming attraction, not a...
Yeah, I mean, there's also a divide on how much Cohen cooperated. It seemed like the Southern District Court wants to send him away. Mueller seemed to say, oh, he's playing ball with us. Let's be a little more lenient. To me, the top line of this whole thing, all these documents, is one thing. It's that the Southern District Court of New York says the President of the United States engaged in a criminal conspiracy to violate campaign finance laws through those two payments. Forget the collusion. I don't think... Well, this stack of papers does not prove the collusion, but just read it. Individual 1 is cited in this document 24 times, and it says Individual 1 directed a criminal conspiracy with his attorney to violate campaign finance, basically saying the President of the United States committed a felony.
Right, at the direction of, and that's the part that really captured everybody's attention, Molly.
And I know I might be disagreeing, which I never want to do, with Professor Turley here, but I think it's not an open and shut case. This is a very interesting section of the sentencing memo, and it is extremely overwritten. It is very dramatic. I don't think it's settled whether this would be a campaign election violation. And in order to make that case, you should live your life in such a way that nobody ever tries to get you to pay money for silence. You should live your life that way, and I don't think that Donald Trump has lived his life that way. But in order to make this case, they basically are going to have to prove that Donald Trump has literally never paid anyone for their silence. That is something I might not be willing to risk.
But in the background, obviously, of all of that is the election that is ongoing. And you mentioned the writing there. Here it is. This is full-screen memo number 2. Cohen's commission of 2 campaign finance crimes on the eve of the 2016 election for President of the United States struck a blow to one of the core goals of the federal campaign finance laws, transparency. While many Americans who desired a particular outcome to the election knocked on doors, toiled at phone banks, or found any number of other legal ways to make their voices heard, Cohen sought to influence the election from the shadows. He did so by orchestrating secret and illegal payments to silence 2 women who otherwise would have made public their alleged extramarital affairs with individual 1, Donald Trump. In the process, Cohen deceived the voting public by hiding alleged facts that he believed would have had a substantial effect on the election. It is this type of harm that Congress sought to prevent when it imposed limits on individual contributions to candidates. Jonathan.
Well, first of all, Molly's point is a good one. You still have to prove the crime. What's different here is that previously it was Michael Cohen that was alluding to Donald Trump's involvement. This is the special counsel saying it in a filing and saying that it views this account to be, quote, credible, if you look at both these filings together. That is serious. Now, it's not that the federal election crime itself is as serious. In some ways, obstruction is a type of parasitic crime. It lives off another crime. So if the special counsel is saying, look, there was this crime here on the federal election laws, and then there was an effort to obstruct efforts to reveal that crime, then the obstruction crime could become actually more serious than the original crime. That's the problem for the Trump administration, because courts will find that a very credible argument. Now, at the end of the day, I think there's still good arguments he could make that I was doing this as a husband. I was trying to basically silence people that I allegedly had affairs with. But when you have that obstruction allegation that is clearly being sort of laid out here, it gets more serious.
But you know, that last line, Byron, where he's talking about Congress, it kind of serves up on a silver platter to House Democrats to determine whether that's high crimes and misdemeanor and start an impeachment process.
And that's what they're going to do. To make what Molly said a little simpler, I think Trump's biggest defense in the payoff case is, I've been paying off women for years. I didn't do it I didn't start doing it when I ran for president. But clearly, you're right. This is teed up for Democrats to make this about campaign violations. And something Dave said very, very quickly. He said, "Forget the collusion. This stuff is really important." Now that's going to be a very interesting thing to see if Democrats actually try to make that pivot. Yeah, forget the collusion. Let's talk about campaign finance. We've been talking for 2 years about how this is Trump and Russia conspiring to fix the election.
Molly.
And that is, I think, such an important issue. The trust of the American people in our law enforcement agencies and whether they can handle when someone who they don't like is elected president and whether that person has the right to run his administration or whether anyone who helped that person will have their entire life gone through. That is something that can be very damaging to the health of the republic. And so I hope people of all stripes care about that issue as well.
And you know, David, this is really interesting, and we got to do it quickly, but the decision that House Democrats will have when likely Speaker Pelosi takes the gavel, when presented with all of this, will be monumental politically as you look forward to 2020.
Absolutely, because we're about to start a presidential race, and you're going to have senators announcing and them having to decide, should we go forward with impeachment proceedings? We know how that ended up for Republicans after they did it to Bill Clinton. They got backlash, but I think you will see some Democrats saying this is the rule of law. And even though this investigation started about collusion, it happened. Jonathan can tell us, but it happens all the time. You open an investigation, it leads you down a different rabbit hole, and this rabbit hole may be campaign finance, a violation, and not collusion.
It's amazing. Panel, thank you so much. Jonathan, thanks for sticking around.